Today we'll talk about Before Your Eyes, a game developed and published in 2021 by Goodbye World Games. This is a narrative-heavy game about Benjamin Brin, a small child, American child, who lived who had struggles with social life, meeting his parents' expectations, and chronic illness. So those are the broad themes that are explored in this small 2 hours experience. So we'll talk briefly about the genesis of this project before engaging in the discussion around the embodied play. So at the beginning, this was a student thesis focusing on the small Unity plugin using eye tracking technology to interact with the game. And in this game, you interact with the narrative between with eye blinking and mouse movement. So this is a first-person POV game where you cannot move. You can just check around your surroundings and blink to interact when it is available. The goal of this game, according to the developers, was to push video game boundaries within PC gaming and not using VR completely, but remaining within broader commercial PC use. And the question, so the question we'll ask ourselves today is how can more technology can transform the player into a cyborg, and to have a more available player to human connection and feeling. So to explore that, we'll first see how the tension between the emotion from the narrative and the emotions from the gameplay. Then we see how repetition, typical of the video game medium, is used in Before Your Eyes to create a more cyborg player, and how this is used to break down the concept of flow, and how this idea is can be understood with the concept of co-presence. And finally, we'll look more closely.
I'm not presenting, but you want me up.
Okay. So we'll look more closely at embodied play and human connection and how it is afforded in this game. So the emotion from the narrative can sometimes be uttered with the emotion from the gameplay. Usually in games academia, we analyze meaning through mechanics. We can see that in the works of Jan Bogost with procedural rhetoric, for example, which is quite a seminal point in game studies. And well, this can be seen quite obviously with such as quick time events in God of War, which afford violence, reactivity, and a sense of urgency to the player. But meaning can also come from controllers and how we directly interact with the game. So obviously there are typical controllers with keyboard and mouse and the standard Xbox controller that we use. But there are a lot of more specific controllers that have been used in the decades of the medium. And we can think of dance mats for Dance Revolution that are specifically tailored to the game, to the software used. And the same can be said for steering wheels for driving game and driving simulations. And we can say that these types of controller tend to want to hide the veil between material life, so the real player life, and the fiction. So by using a wheel to simulate a driving game, you want to mimic what it feels like to actually drive a car in real life. But what is interesting in Before Your Eyes is that blinking is not a specific live event relating to a specific activity or anything. Everybody blinks. It is a simple consequence of human biology. And so it makes for a more universal way of interacting, or at least a way of existing, because everyone blinks. Using it in a game makes for a more important connection. So using the blinking in the game further emphasizes the connection between the fiction and real life, and does not try to hide the separation between real life and the fiction. Also, what is interesting is that there is a physical reaction to blinking or not blinking. For example, here the physical reaction of not blinking is a feature of the game. For me, when I first played the game, the software asks you sometimes to keep your eyes open for a long period of time, which can make you teary-eyed. And this is interesting that because the narrative is an emotional one and often described as a really sad game, and this is reflected in literally how you play the game. And for that, we can think of what Brendan Kriog says in Play of Bodies, is that meaning is made through the display of audiovisual stimuli between the graphics, the sound design, and everything, and the habitus of gameplay, and how much we are used to how the game is played. And most of the time, this can separate players from truly engaging with a game, because they are not as versed as some are with the gameplay. But here, blinking is universal, well, almost universal. And so, secondly, it is interesting to see how much this video game uses the concepts of immersion breaking to develop its narrative. In typical game design, and at least in commercial game design, we associate keeping the attention of the player to the game with flow and with fun, and then good design. Because it keeps the attention away from the reality of the player. But and so most games tend to seek a symbiotic relation between the machine and the player, which means that the player is not supposed to think of his true living experience while he plays the game. He's supposed to only think of the game, and this can be understood with the concept of techno trance from Mathieu Triclot, where he says that most games are not about flow, but about some kind of a trance, of a fusion with the video game itself. And whereas when you force the player to keep his eyes open or shut, it reminds the player of his lived experience. There is a specific instance in the game where you have to keep your eyes shut to understand the audio clues, and this is quite a unique instance in video games, where you are rarely asked to close your eyes for a long period of time. But by doing that, you at the same time you hear what the video game tells you, and you understand it in the context of the narrative. But usually, when you close your eyes, you also think much more about your own lived experience. And since the narrative before your eyes is such a human one, about grief, personal struggles, and the like, so the player is most of the time the player tend to think of his own lived experience while playing the game, which is unusual. And this can be understood with the concept of co-presence, where the player is present in the fiction by relating to Benjamin Breen and what happens to him, but also is present in his own body, constantly thinking of its body failures, of his blinking, and so. And this is interesting because the point of the narrative is not so much to display a tragic story of a kid who are sick, but more so to reflect on memories and to reflect on how we think of the past. And in Before Your Eyes, it is interesting that it uses loops in a more unique way than most video games do, because it doesn't use challenge loops to keep the player engaged in the gameplay, but the narrative is a loop where you see again and again different aspects of the character's life, and each time the game adds context or takes away context, certain details of the narrative, which makes for a more cybernetic loop that adds to your understanding of the character's life each time. The narrative wants you to make parallels between how you perceive your own memories and how you think of the story of Benjamin Green. The repetition afforded by the medium allows the player to have agency over the narrative. Blinking is used to interact with the game, and sometimes it is used to for the player to have a small agency over small choices. So whether to take a photograph of the desk or of the sky. But these small choices can sometimes amount to a specific way of seeing how the main character remembers his life. Not to spoil the ending of the game, but it is interesting how the choices you can make as a player are afforded in the end of the story, allowing you to choose how you remember the kid's life. So finally, we can see how this game uses embodied play as a means to further emphasize the human connection between the player and the fiction. I'd like to quote here again Brendan Keogh in Player's Bodies, where he says that what I'm capable of doing in each scene is less important than how that scene incorporates me as a situated being capable of looking, listening, and touching. And this is quite an important quote, I think, to understand this concept of embodied play in the context of Before Your Eyes, because it is such a game. It is a game so focused on the senses, which is quite unusual at this much for video games, because you are constantly seeing, focusing on what you're hearing, and focusing on how you're seeing, and so there is a meta reflexivity about your vision and what your senses allow you to do and allow you not to do. That it's interesting. And so there is a tension between the usual mastery of video games and letting the events unfold in this specific video game. You can master eye opening as a technique. You cannot keep your eyes open for an extended period of time unless you cheat at the game. But it kind of defeats the whole experience. And so we can make a parallel between this the incapability of every player to master eye opening between and with the hackers and cyborgs that Keogh explores in his book. He says that hackers represent mainstream video game culture that are also focused on understanding the machine and the computers to their full extent in order to beat it, to conquer them, and to come out the victorious ones. And the cyborgs, on the other hand, represent more marginalized people that cannot or do not want to conquer the machine, but rather want to walk with it and understand it, to tell different stories and to focus more on empathy rather than victory or feelings like that. And here it is interesting to see how eye blinking affords a universal connection both to the narrative and also to the machine. Since you cannot beat eye opening, you have to embrace the connection rather than defy it. You cannot defy the machine trying to absolutely beat it. You cannot speedrun Before Your Eyes. but you have to let the events unfold in the time that is allowed to you, but you can make the most use out of that. And what is interesting here is how the pleasure from playing this game, pleasure understood not as obviously a positive emotion, but as emotions, it comes from the lack of agency and of control over the narrative. There is not 100 branching narratives possibilities, but and this is atypical for commercial video games right now. But this makes for a unique cyborg player, where you have to understand the machine and work with it and not against it. And so here we can understand how different technologies are used to afford different players. As we've said in the beginning, QuickTime events will not be used in before your eyes because they defeat the whole point of letting the narrative unfold. This game is the prime example of of almost a forced embodied play, in the sense that when playing it, you engage your body fully within the narrative, and you see how it can be understood. And so this is fascinating in the sense that embodied play can mean many things, but here it is a feature of the game in its design, and so embodied play always happens in every video games because you're always playing with your body. But it can be a more important feature in order to tell more emotional stories and to create new ways of interacting with video games, which is done here in this game. So thank you.